Hey, I'm Brian Miller, magician and motivational speaker. If you're a regular subscriber, thanks so much for sticking with me, and if you're new here, welcome to the channel. In today's video, we're going over 3 different lenses that you can use with the Canon EOS M3 or any of the Canon M series mirrorless cameras. We'll be going over the 11-22 wide-angle zoom lens, the 18-55 zoom kit, and the 22mm prime f2 that's sitting on my camera right now. First, we're going to test how much context you can get when holding it out on a Joby GorillaPod in front of you. In other words, how much of the background are you able to see in addition to just your face. Then we're going to test the image stabilization capabilities of the lenses while walking around in uneven conditions. Then we're going to test the bokeh, that's the background blur. How much background blur can you get with each of these lenses? We're also going to test their zoom capabilities to see how far in they zoom and how good it looks when you do it. And last but not least, we're going to test them in indoor lighting conditions. Regular, normal, indoor lighting conditions that so many vloggers find themselves in when we can't set up what I'm in right now, which is a great studio lighting, picture perfect setup. Let's get into it. Okay, this is the first test of the 11-22. If I'm standing at a normal arm's length like this, you can see a lot of stuff behind me. I could extend way out even further than that and you would get even more, but this is kind of a normal arm's length right there. Testing the 18-55 for regular walk around vlogging. This is with it held out at a normal arm's length. This is how much context you can see. This is as far as I can go, although you could not hold this position for very long at all. It's very awkward. So at a normal arm's length, this is about the context that you would see from the 18-55. Okay, vlogging test on the 22mm f2 prime lens. And this is held out at a normal arm's length. Normal arm's length, the furthest I can go is that. That's as far as I can get it away from me, but you couldn't do that for very long. So at a normal arm's length, you can see that you get a very low amount of context. You can see my face and not much else. Okay, now this is a test of the image stabilization built into the 11-22. I'm going to be walking very, very quickly. I'm on uneven grass. If I head up a hill like this, up a small hill, alright, and back down a hill. Okay, image stabilization test on the 18-55. I'm walking quickly across uneven grass. I'll go back and do that again. Walking quickly across uneven grass for image stabilization. Now I'm heading up a small hill. Quickly up a small hill, all right, and back down a small hill. Woo! There is no image stabilization built into the 22mm prime lens for the Canon mirrorless system. So as you can see, as I'm moving around, walking quickly across uneven grass, it's going to be shaking all over the place. There is absolutely zero image stabilization, either in the lens itself or built into the camera. If I go back down the hill, it's going to be shaking like crazy. This is a test of the zoom capabilities. This is at 11mm, that's as wide as it goes. And that's at 22mm, as zoomed in as it goes. Okay, zoom test on the 18-55. This is 18 at its widest, and that's 55 at its longest. Zoom test for the 22mm. That's it. It does 22mm. That's what it looks like. You cannot zoom on this lens. Test of the bokeh, or background blur, with the 11-22. You're always going to get the best bokeh at the furthest zoomed in point. So I'm currently at 22mm, which naturally stops down the lens to f5.6. So you can see that there's not a whole lot of bokeh in this lens. The 11-22 is not going to give you a lot of background blur. The background behind me is still pretty clear. Now I'm at f4 at 11mm. f4 at 11mm, that's all the bokeh you're going to get. That's as good as it's going to be. And this is a bokeh test set at 55mm on the 18-55. I'm naturally stopped down to 5.6 because it's a zoom lens that does that on its own. So f5.6 at 55 millimeters on the 18 to 55. This is what the background blur looks like. The 18 to 55 millimeter at 18. This is a Bokeh Test at 18 millimeters for the 18 to 55. Okay, Bokeh Test for the 22 millimeter at 22 millimeters. This is the Bokeh. This is the only option you have. Now, I'm set at f2.8 because even at 2.8 it's way too bright. If I drop down to f2, it's insanely too bright right now, and it's not even that bright of a day. This is a very, very bright lens, so I can't even give you the full experience of how amazing the Bokeh is on this lens. Okay, we're doing an indoor lighting test now with all three lenses. Every single one is going to be set exactly where this is in the exact same condition on the Joby Gorilla Pod, and I'm not going to touch anything except changing the lenses. I'm sitting here, that's there. I'm about 3 feet away from the lens right now. Think about 3 feet away, yeah. For this indoor lighting test, I've got 2 overhead lights on. There's one up here, and there's one right above the camera. They are both regular tungsten standard indoor lights that anybody has in their house. There's also an open window right next to me that's letting a decent amount of light in at 4:30 at night, indirect ambient light coming in through a glass panel, so it's nice soft diffused light like we like for video. So I got the 11 to 22 on 11 millimeters, the widest. You can see there's a huge amount of context in this image right now. Now I've got it at f4 because that's as bright as this lens will go. It starts at f4. This is a dark lens overall. And so I've got my ISO up at 640 right now, which is as high as I like to put my ISO before it starts to introduce noise or grain. If you're confused about why I chose 640 specifically, I did a video about it. I'll link it up here somewhere. If I wanted it to be even brighter, because right now this isn't even that bright, I could crank my ISO another stop up 1250. If I do that, you're probably going to start to see some noise and grain creeping in the darker areas of the image, but overall, it's pretty good. Test on the 18 to 55. I'm at the widest 18 millimeters in a normal indoor lighting condition. I'm at f3.5, which is as bright as this lens will go. I have the ISO up at 640. Okay, this is the 22 millimeter prime. I am all the way open at f2 because that's as bright as this lens will go, and because I'm at f2, I was able to drop my ISO all the way down to 320. So I was able to drop a full stop of my ISO, which means less noise, less grain in the image, and a nicer, cleaner, brighter image overall with better background blur. And while we're in this condition, I'm going to do another Bokeh test. This is the 11 to 22 on 22 millimeters, as zoomed in as it goes, but because this is a dark lens, it's all the way down at f5.6 when I zoom in, so I had to crank my ISO up to 1250, and it's still nowhere near bright enough. But even though it's not bright enough, you can get a general sense of the Bokeh, which is to say there's almost none on this lens. Because as soon as you zoom in far enough to start to get Bokeh, we're already down at 5.6. You're not going to get any background blur with this lens. It's just not what it's for. Okay, this is the 18 to 55 millimeter for the indoor Bokeh test. I'm on 55 millimeters, which is as zoomed in as it can be. It's all the way stopped down to 5.6 because it's a zoom lens and it does that naturally. And because it got so much darker, I did have to crank the ISO up to 1250. But as you can see, even though I had to crank up my ISO, even though it's at 5.6, because I was able to zoom in so far, there's a decent amount of background blur. It's still not going to be terrific. It's not going to be fantastic, but at 55 millimeters, you'll get a little bit of background blur. If I had better light on my face right now, you would get even more of the background blur. But this is a normal indoor condition, and vlogging, we are never in ideal lighting conditions. It's not like when I do studio shoots. This is about vlogging only, not for setting up 3 lights, key light, fill light, hair light, this is not for that. This is just for normal indoor conditions. This is what the Bokeh looks like. And the 22 millimeter prime at 22 millimeters. This is such a bright lens that at f2 I was able to drop the ISO down to 320, and look at how beautiful that background blur is with this lens. You really get a beautiful, crisp image with nice bokeh, nice background blur, and it's properly lit for the situation that we're in. The 11 to 22 millimeter, the 18 to 55 kit, or the 22 millimeter prime f2 that's on the camera right now. If you can only choose one, I suggest that you either get the 18 to 55 kit or the 15 to 45 kit. Now, I don't own and have never owned the 15 to 45, so I can't speak to it specifically, but I know that it's very, very similar in all of its specs to the 18 to 55. I've heard though that it's a little bit softer and this is a little bit sharper. The 18 to 55 is a truly, truly terrific kit lens. You can find it used for under $100 usually, which is a steal. It feels good, it's solid, it feels like metal, it's well made, even though a lot of the components are plastic, it really feels solid. 18 is wide enough that you can hold it out at a normal arm's length and still vlog with it. 55 gives you a really long zoom range for kind of pointing to stuff off in the distance and zooming in on them from afar while you're vlogging. You really can't go wrong with the 18 to 55. If you're only going to get one, definitely start here. So if you already own the 18 to 55 or the 15 to 45 and you're looking to add a second lens to your vlogging setup, that's when you go for the 11 to 22. The 11 to 22 is absolutely unrivaled in terms of holding it out in front of you and getting all that context. When you're vlogging, you want people to not just see you talking, but you want them to be able to get a sense of where you are. And the 11 millimeters is so wide that you really get a good sense of where the person is and what they're up to in their surroundings. Now, it is a darker lens, starting at f4 and going all the way up to 5.6 when you zoom into 22 millimeters. But you do have a zoom. I mean, it's a small zoom. It's nowhere near the kind of zoom that's in the 18 to 55, but 22 means you'll still be able to, be looking at the camera, talking to it on 11, see something, turn it around, zoom in a little bit closer to show them, zoom back, turn it back around, and get back on you at 11. That's what I do. This is my main vlogging lens. Downside of this lens, first, it's dark, like we talked about. Second, it's expensive. You're almost never going to find this lens for less than $400. There's not a whole lot of used ones out there. You're not going to get a steal on it. Even though $400 is not a lot of money in the world of great camera lenses, on the Canon M series, this is about as expensive as you can get for a lens. So keep that in mind. Now, if you've got a kit zoom lens and you've got the wide zoom 18 to 22 for your main vlogging, if you've already got both of those and you're looking to add one more thing, that's when you pick up the 22 millimeter prime that's on the camera right now. This lens is phenomenal for low light situations because it picks up so much extra light that these ones don't, starting at 3.5 and f4 over here. Darker lenses. This one's much brighter. You're gonna be much better off in low light or normal indoor vlogging situations without having to crank up that ISO and get all the extra noise and grain. The downside is that when you drop it all the way down to f2 to get all that extra light, this lens has a little bit of trouble autofocusing. It hunts a lot in that situation. For that reason, even though right now I've got a studio lighting setup, even in this situation, if I drop this down to f2 to really make the most of the light and get the best background blur, it starts to hunt and focus hunting a little bit. So I stop down to f2.8 if I want to make sure that it's not going to be doing any focus hunting. And I think it's been pretty good for this video. At 2.8, I have my ISO at 320, which is perfectly usable. You should see very little noise or grain in this video at all right now. There's really no reason you should. When you're down at f2, you could have your ISO all the way down to 160. And again, if you're not sure why I'm saying 160, 320, 640, you're gonna watch that video that I linked up here earlier. I'll also put it in the description below that explains ISO settings for the EOS M3 and general Canon M series. So that's it for the lenses with the Canon M series or the Canon EOS M3. Listen, if you're new to vlogging or new to this camera or new to the Canon M series, you might want to check out the part 1 and part 2 of my vlogging settings and tutorials videos. I've linked them up here. They're linked in the description. Check those out. I really hope that this was useful to you. The links to all of the lenses will be in the description below. If you enjoyed this or find it useful, please hit that like button, subscribe to my channel. You can follow my vlogs and you'll see me using all 3 different lenses over the course of my vlogs. Anyway, this was my second attempt at making this video. The first time I filmed it, I was very unhappy with the final result, so I completely refilmed all of this. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it was worth the effort. Let me know if you have any more questions in the comments below about any of these lenses, or the Canon M3, or general vlogging settings tutorials. Thanks very much for watching, and always remember, our world is a shared experience. Happy vlogging. Have a great day, guys. So without further ado, let's get into the test. So without further ado, let's get into it. I don't know what that was. Alright, we're done.